Hi, I'm CJ and this is my RC channel. In this video, I'm going to be showing you some footage of the drag car during some first tests that did not go very well. The main issue seems to be the ball differential. It was also a damp day. You can see that the asphalt is mostly dry, but it was still drizzling a little bit, as you can tell by looking at the car. From time to time you'll see drops of rain on it. So let's watch that first run. Let's see that again in slow motion. In any event, it is an extremely powerful motor at 2.5 turns. It's a dedicated drag motor. It's a race motor. As you can see in this clip, the rear end squats and then it goes. It's not wheeling. The mid-engine and the battery seems to really do a good job of holding that front end down. The front end doesn't come off the ground at all. You can tell the wheelie bar never even touches down. But as soon as it starts to lose some traction, it launches off to one side. There's several reasons, I think, for this. Number one, I was running a 3.5 degree rear toe plate. Basically, that means that there is 3.5 degrees of toe. I wanted to try that, see how that went. Obviously isn't the best way to go. Also, I'm running a ball differential with ceramic balls, and it is a very smooth differential. And it wasn't very tight. It was reasonably tight, but not overly. And so as soon as one tire started to lose some traction, the other one just took control and is pitching the car sideways. Number one, because of the excessive amount of power going to one tire versus the other, and because of that toe angle, that makes it want to steer the car in one direction versus the other. And another factor is probably the dampness. Now, I tried a burnout before the second run, and I still had a similar effect, just a little further away from the start line. But there's also a crack in the asphalt that the sliding tire runs over, and that seems to kind of initiate the pitch.
It's really weird.
Damn.
You can hear the...
The third run, I got a good launch, got all the way down, but I did have to modulate the throttle. I wasn't able to run full throttle all the way down because it was starting to get squirrely again. And again, no wheelie, just a nice squat and go, which is ideal. I am very impressed with that. The mid-engine position seems to definitely lend itself to this type of RC car racing. But the ball differential seems to be the big problem. I had some other issues. The speed controller I was using is a Tekin RS. It isn't made to handle motors below 8.5 turn. And as you know, I'm running a 2.5 turn, so it's way out of the range. Once the Tekin RS kind of figured out, because it gave me a few small problems, and I was able to like reset it and get it running again. But once it really figured out, okay, there's a 2.5 turn motor in here, it stopped working altogether. It just refused to play ball. So I have a new speed control. I bought a Tekin RX8 Gen 3 1/8 scale speed control. I also, as you will see in this video, have built a locked differential. I took that nice, freshly rebuilt ball differential with the ceramic balls, and I put it in a Ziploc bag, labeled it, and put it in my parts box. And if I ever rebuild this truck or repurpose it back to running off-road, I have that differential waiting for me. But I took some old diff parts and brand new gear. I just basically modified the out drives and used a couple of large grub screws to create a full lock differential. I took out the 3.5 degree plate and put in a 2.5 degree toe plate, which is the least amount of toe that you can put on that vehicle. They don't make a 2 degree or lower plate. So I'm kind of stuck with that, but I think that the locker is going to be the big fix. And I'm putting on a different body, something that's a little more aerodynamic. It's got a little more of a, it's got a front end that is going to provide more downforce because of the sloping shape. If you noticed from my test runs, as soon as the car started to go to either the left or the right, immediately the tire that has the least amount of traction spins up because there's a diff, and even with the diff fairly snug, it's still, you know, radically spins up faster than the other wheel, which causes the car to suddenly turn and somersault. There's a lot of momentum there in those rear tires, and once they wind up, there's no stopping it. So what I'm going to try is a full locked rear differential, basically a solid axle. And the way I am making that is I had some spare diff parts. So I have taken a gear and I have enlarged 2 of the holes, and I have put in 2 large grub screws that I have cut to size, so they are just slightly narrower than the gear. I took the 2 out drives and I used a Dremel to grind some elliptical cutaways in them so they fit over the grub screws, and then I'm going to use the existing bearings purely as spacers to centrally locate the out drives and the gear, and then I'll be using the existing blind nut, and this would normally have the thrust bearing. Instead, I'm just using a couple of extra washers for space, and I'm going to crank that down nice and snug. It doesn't have to be over tight, because what's going to create the locking is those grub screws and the cutaways in the out drives. So that should give me a solid locked rear end, and we'll test and see how that goes. So here we have one locked up diff, and everything looks perfectly centered. The ball bearings really take care of that. What I did was just to make sure that the ellipses or whatever that I cut into the out drives had a little bit of extra space. You know, because I put the spring in there and cranked it down almost completely compressed, there's nothing I can do that is gonna, I can get a little bit of back and forth where those out drives can shift slightly against the grub screws, but that's not going to be a problem. They're not going to go anywhere. And because I use such large grub screws, they've got a tremendous amount of strength and influence. The gear would literally have to tear itself apart. So I think this is going to function, and I have spare gears, so if it ever does blow up on me, all I need to do is take another gear, slightly enlarge 2 of the holes to accommodate the grub screws, thread them in, and bolt it back together again. So it is repairable. So now it's time to put everything back together. I had been running a 3.5 degree low roll center rear bracket, and I am replacing this with a 2.5 degree, so less toe. I have a feeling that 3.5 and above is just too much rear toe, especially with a solid axle, because once one of those tires starts to lose, that helps make it want to steer offline because of that that toe in. In fact, if I could get one that had less than 2.5 degrees, I would. As far as I know, 2.5 degrees was the lowest rear toe bracket that was made by TLR. If I can figure out a way to do something about that, I will, but I don't think that there's anything I can do. So I'll just go with it as is and make the best of it. I'm not running a slipper. I'm running a locker right now. I don't see that a slipper is going to help me with this kind of issue. I think I'm better off tuning the amount of punch that I get from the electric ESC, tuning it from that end, limiting the power curve and letting it ramp up is probably more effective and more productive than trying to use a slipper clutch, which you really only have so much control over, and it doesn't help you at all once the car starts losing control. In fact, once the car starts losing traction at all, it's gonna lock up and you're gonna have a locked connection anyway. So I may tinker with it at some point. It does involve, you know, completely disassembling the rear end, taking apart the transmission to remove the drive shaft that is up here. But I have all the parts, so and I've got some fresh slipper plates, so it's something that I may try. But I'm going to try a lot of other things first. I may soften up my rear springs a bit, things of that nature. And I do have a good variety of springs because of short course racing. So I have the ability to tinker with those things first. As you can see, I put some fuel line on the two rear shocks to not only limit their travel, I wanted to make sure that the tires wouldn't impact the body, especially as they start, you know, frisbeeing as they, you know, grow in size from acceleration. These are belted tires, so hopefully that's not too big a problem, but I've seen them expand pretty hard. So it's definitely something to watch out for, and this is a good solution. It lets you run a softer spring and milder damping, and you've still got that, you know, point of impact where you've still got some squish because of the flexible nature of the silicone fuel line. But it does give you a hard limit. At some point it totally, you know, stops, and that's as far as your suspension is going to collapse. And if that prevents the tires from rubbing against the body, that's an excellent way to go about it, and definitely justification for having it. So you may try that yourself. So I want to show you some of the custom things that you may have to make for yourselves. For example, the wheelie bar. No one that I can find is currently producing a mount for a wheelie bar for the TLR or Losi 22 short course trucks in any of the generations. This is the original 22 SCT, as I have mentioned before, and I'm running it in a mid-engine configuration, which I think is going to benefit a lot. From what I have seen, the people that run the 22 are all pretty much running mid-engine, especially the people that... Sorry, I'm doing battery maintenance again, ongoing process. Okay, For example, the lower mount right here is a combination of a aluminum bracket that came from an associated kit. I've had this sitting around in a drawer for quite a while. It's part an aluminum servo mount, and basically I needed a strong 90-degree mount, and I wanted it to be light. I could trim off this section here, but it's not worth butchering it. It's negligible amount of weight there, and a handful of 3mm, two 3mm and a 2mm spacer on either side made this fit perfectly. This bracket here, this black bracket, is actually a Spectrum servo bracket that came with a servo I bought a long time ago. I'm not sure whether it was a spacer. The only holes were these two vertical holes here and here, non-threaded. So I assume it was a spacer to raise a servo up off of some surface. In any event, the bracket for the suspension, the shock tower for the rear, which does a handful of things. It's more than just a shock tower bracket. It holds the waterfall for the mid-engine chassis brace, a handful of other things. It mounts the ball sockets for the rear control arms. So it had these holes already in it for the rear bumper mount, and I just repurposed them with some washers and spacers to mount this aluminum bracket. I drilled two holes here, and I drilled a hole going through it on either side, and that gives me all the adjustability that I need for the wheelie bar, while at the same time giving me a nice strong structure. I can lift the vehicle by the wheelie bar. There's no flex. It's really strong, surprisingly. Since I wasn't going to be running a rear bumper, I had to change up some bolts. Instead of having pass-throughs to a piece of plastic that would have been bolted on this side coming out, I just used different hardware and some washers and some lock nuts, and likewise I used lock nuts throughout. Then we have the body mount right here. This is part of an aftermarket Proline body mount, but I have again repurposed it, drilled a couple holes through it here and here, and drilled a couple holes through the shock tower, and with a bunch of spacers and two threaded barrels, I was able to stand it off from the body at a good distance, and again, very strong. One of the things I did to help stiffen things up was using large 1mm washers at either side, and that has really bulked it up as far as its angular strength. You can literally, again, lift the vehicle by this. It's not going anywhere. So that, as you can see, because of its height in relationship to the shock tower, is going to allow me to run a body right on top of here. That's as low as it's going to go without having to replace the entire shock tower with something else. Now, there's a list of parts that I'm going to be putting up on the screen for you. And most of them are 5.0 buggy parts. The rear A-arms are a stiffer than stock version of the 5.0 buggy rear arms. I had to only do a minimum amount of shaving. I just had to get rid of a little bit of material in the bottom of the arms to get them to clear this chassis.
and I needed to add a couple of nylon spacers and a couple of metal washers, and that filled this space. I could have put them on either side, but I was trying to lengthen the wheelbase as much as possible, so I put them all at this end. I also switched them left for right to, again, get myself a little more of rearward position. And for mounting the shocks, I made sure to use a long bolt that would go as far into the pre-drilled holes as possible, to give it as much stiffness as possible, and 6 millimeters worth of spacers, 3 millimeter spacers, to make sure that the shock was vertical, as opposed to having it be at some kind of angle to its mounts. Let's see, is there anything else? Well, of course, there is the front. The front is a similar situation. To narrow up the front end, and that was the reason for using these buggy parts here in the rear, is the stock arms are about this much longer, and so that means you also need different drive shafts. Now, these are the 67 millimeter drive shafts. You'll see that in the parts list. And all you need is the dog bones. You don't need the out drives and the CV parts, because if your existing hardware is already good, if your drive shafts are in decent shape, all you're doing is swapping a dog bone. All the parts, out drives, and all of the parts that attach the CV to the out drive here, all of that stuff transfers over, so that's nice and easy and less expensive. Turnbuckles are an issue because everything is narrower, front and rear. In the front, you've got 4 turnbuckles that are all narrower. These arms, just like the arms on the short course in the rear, the short course truck arms are at least a full centimeter or more wider on either side, so you need to replace those with these 5.0 buggy ones, and they mount right up to the swing arm block right here without any problems. I'm using the same, everything out this end hardware wise is all the same. The only thing I have done is replace these nuts, right, or these bolts right here. They are they're half threaded and half of it is smooth. The smooth part rotates in this hole or this hole, so I could narrow this even further if I wanted to. But the point being that your standard hardware won't work with these holes, so you need to buy a set of these screws. I think I paid about $5 or $6 for a bag of 6 to 8. I only needed 4, of course, 2 here and 2 on this side. And again, all this hardware, these blocks, the caster blocks, the steering blocks, everything is off of my short course truck. I did buy a bag of pass-through ball sockets, these little plastic suckers here. Having that hole in the top allows you to remove these ball joints and add or remove spacers as needed, and change that front end geometry, make adjustments without having to pop them off and then snap them back on, which if you've worked with cars over any length of time, you know they eventually loosen, and then they are prone to popping off at the worst time, usually during a race. So by getting a bag of these this type, they're made by TLR, one bag full will do the entire kit. And again, I think they're in the $6 to $10 range for the bag of them. And I'll try to have that part up for you as well. This is a set of titanium turnbuckles. They are a stock replacement for the buggy turnbuckles. I just bought the kit, which included all 6 turnbuckles. They're all the same size, and they replace the much longer, beefier short course truck turnbuckles that are too long for the car once you have switched out these arms. I put some spacers in my shocks underneath the pistons, about 3 or 4 millimeters worth, and I put this piece of fuel line on the shock shaft to limit the overall amount of compression, so that the front tires cannot contact the body. These cars are prone to wheeling, and the front end's going to come down hard. And if it's pressing, if it slams the tire up against the hood of the body, it's going to stop the tire or slow it and impede your progress. It's going to slow you down a little bit, possibly cause you to lose control. So something that you want to get rid of while you can. So doing that modification to your shock is a good idea. Let me just go over the rear shocks real quick. These are front short course truck shock bodies with the long rear shock shafts. So again, I put in some spacers, and I put in these bump stops to again prevent the rear tires from hitting the body. But by using these front shock bodies instead of the longer rear shock bodies, that already gives me a limited amount of travel. So that's a convenient way to start tuning your rear end to having less movement, less overall travel, and a shorter height in general, because this isn't an off-road vehicle, so we don't want that extra 1/4 to a 1/2 inch of extra shock body, which makes this suspension droop more. So that's about it to show you. I'm in the first rebuild of this process. This piece right here, 2.5 degrees LRC, which is the low roll center rear suspension mount, and I got rid of the 3.5 degree in favor of less toe. That is as narrow or as least amount of toe as Losi makes parts for. They have as much as 4 degrees, and they go in 1/2 degree increments. I looked, but apparently they never made a 2 degree. I would have liked to have gone down to 1.5 or 1 or even 0, because for drag racing, you really don't need that much toe. It doesn't benefit you, because once one tire starts losing traction and starts to spin, the other one gets all the influence, and if it's at an angle to the chassis, it's gonna push the chassis at that angle, so it's gonna be prone to losing control. The more toe, in fact, the less stable it's going to be. Now, that's not true normally. Normally, more toe to a certain degree gives you better straight line stability for most types of car racing, but drag racing, there's so much wheel spin, and there's so much power and torque going into those rear wheels. They have such an influence over the chassis that they can literally just flip the car out of control. If you watch the first couple videos, I wasn't being very disciplined about it. The first run, I rolled the thing within about 15 feet of the line, because I had never run the motor before. I'd never tinkered with this thing before or done drag racing, and my first instinct was just to hammer it and see what it could do. And in a matter of blink of an eye, it's out of control and rolling down the track top over tea kettle. So, and then I tried using, you know, I had already programmed the ESC with a fairly mild power curve, expecting that, you know, I didn't want to let it get out of hand right off the line. But I had to really ease off on the power. Now, I was having some issues with the ESC shutting down on me, and that is because this ESC is not going to work for me. This is a good ESC. It's a Tekin Gen 2 RS. It's the original RS. This is about 8 years old. That has nothing to do with it. It's in excellent condition. It's barely been used. It's spent a lot of time just sitting on a shelf. The problem is that I am running this Trinity monster horsepower 2.5 turn motor, and that's, if you're familiar, that's as little turns as you can get in a motor. This is a powerful drag racing specific motor, and this ESC, that Tekin ESC, simply will not work with it. In fact, it is limited to a minimum of 8.5 turn motors and above. So once it figured out that I was giving it, asking it to work with this motor, it shut down and stopped working altogether and just kept throwing error codes at me. So that kind of ended my day early. Now I have a new speed control on order, and it is a 1/8 scale. If you plan to run motors like this, you know, 2.5, 3.5 turn motors, you definitely want a high-end ESC, and I would recommend something that is set up for 1/8 scale. Go into the specs for the ESC on whatever site you're shopping on, and look at the maximum motor allowable. And if it doesn't say either no limit or unlimited, or has a limit of, like, you know, 8.5 or something like that, you're not going to be able to run these motors. It just will not work, period. The ESC will figure it out, and it'll shut you down, and it will not ever work with that motor. So, you know, I tried doing a factory reset on all the settings. It was not fooled by my trickery, and so you're going to need to get a proper speed control for, you know, talk to your hobby shop, ask them, you know, tell them what you're doing, what motor you want to buy or what motor you have, and what ESC would be appropriate to the task. And another reason that I stayed with with Tekin, is because I have the interface box that is used with the RS line. So the new 1/8 scale speed control, I have the box to plug it into the computer. I already have the software loaded on my system, so I can whip out my tablet at the race course and make adjustments to the power curve and any other changes I want to try to control this much power going to the rear wheels. So that kind of gives you an idea of some of the trials and tribulations and some of the parts that you need if you want to try running one of the Losi or one of the TLR short course trucks in the Street Eliminator drag class. If you notice, I've got my receiver right on top of my steering servo. I've got this little piece of the battery bracket. I cannibalized it and cut off the rear portion that comes back off of this, and changed the mounting location that it normally sits at. And I'm using 3 of these pads back here so that the battery sits pretty much against the servo. It's got maybe 1/8 of an inch of space up here if I'm pushing it against the pads. But generally, I'm trying to put as much weight on the front tires, which actually seems to be working in my benefit. I was having a hard time controlling the vehicle, but at the same time, it wasn't wheeling like crazy. The battery combined with the mid-engine and its torque, the way it tries to squat the suspension instead of just popping the front end in the air, it was definitely getting power to the ground. Unfortunately, it was getting there in an uncontrolled manner. So I have my new locked differential. So this is a fully locked rear end. There is no differential action whatsoever. I do not have a slipper in here. This is a locker as well. I may play with the diff, with the slipper clutch. I have all the parts. I've even got a upgraded heavy-duty spring and some brand new pads. I just don't know if it's really going to be helpful, because if I can get the power to the rear end, and if I can keep the car straight, I don't want to be slipping up here. I want all of the power from that nice race motor pouring into those rear tires. I think that any reason that I would want to use a slipper, I think I would be better off tinkering with the electronic speed controls programmability, change the power curve so that the power comes on more softly, more smoothly, and then builds up as the car accelerates, as the RPMs climb. I think that would be a better solution than having a fairly uncontrolled slip process, because you can only get so much out of that. You have a nut and a spring to adjust that slipper, and those slip pads are going to perform differently depending on whether they're hot or cold. Humidity in the air could affect them, things like that. So it's not very predictable, whereas an electronic solution, a software solution, is far more consistent. So we'll see how it goes and see what works best.
I've also got something interesting coming your way. I'm not going to tell you. I'm going to keep you hanging in suspense. So keep checking my channel. Do yourself a favor, subscribe to my channel and click the little bell icon. I've got a really neat new part that I found a vendor out in Las Vegas. The gentleman makes these. It's a US made product, and I think it's really going to enhance the drag racing scene if this catches on big time and more people buy them. It's an add-on. It's made, well, I'm not going to tell you. You guys catch it. Wait for the video, okay? So yeah, I'm trying to get you to come back, and I'm trying to get you to subscribe and click the bell icon and click like.
Thanks for watching.